Elias Vasquez had always measured his life in welds. The clean silver ripple of a perfect seam was his signature, his art, his livelihood. For 30 years, his hands, gnarled and scarred from 1,000 small burns, had brought steel to life, crafting everything from ornamental gates to the skeletons of downtown high-rises. His workshop, a cavern of shadow and light on the edge of the city, smelled of ozone, burnt metal, and hard work. Then the tremors started in his hands. At first, it was a subtle thing, a slight vibration in his fingers after a long day. He chalked it up to fatigue, but it grew. It became a visible shake, a humiliating tremor that made the coffee in his mug slosh onto the blueprint. The day his torch skittered across a crucial joint, ruining a week's worth of work on a custom staircase for the city's new library, was the day he knew. The diagnosis from the neurologist was a cold clinical hammer blow, essential tremor, a progressive neurological disorder. There was no cure, only management. For a welder, it was a death sentence. The months that followed were a slow erosion of self. He closed the workshop, the closed until further notice sign, a constant, mocking reminder of his failure. He retreated to his small house, the silence broken only by the ticking of the clock and the insistent, maddening tremor in his hands. He'd sit for hours, trying to will his fingers to be still, to remember the feeling of absolute control they once possessed. He was a man whose identity had been forged in fire and precision, now rendered useless by a traitorous body. His daughter, Sophia, a graphic designer in the city, was his lifeline. She visited every weekend, bringing groceries, a fierce optimism, and a stubborn love that refused to see him as broken. "Papa," she'd say, sitting on the arm of his worn leather chair, "it's not over. You can teach. You can consult. A teacher who can't demonstrate." He'd scoff, his voice thick with bitterness. "A consultant who can't hold a pen?" "No, Mija, it's over." He'd look at his hands, willing them to be still. They would tremble in response, a cruel parody of a wave. The world outside his window moved on, full of purpose, while he was stuck in a slow, jittery purgatory. One Tuesday, Sophia arrived not with groceries, but with a box. She placed it on the kitchen table with a triumphant thud. "For you," she announced. Inside, nestled in packing foam, was a sleek robotic arm. It was a medical-grade anti-tremor device, a stabilization tool for people with his condition. It was strapped to the forearm and used gyroscopic technology to cancel out the involuntary movements, allowing for a steady hand. Elias stared at it. He touched the carbon fiber and brushed his fingers over the power button. He didn't turn it on. The very existence of the device felt like an indictment. It was a machine to replace the man. "It's not a replacement, Papa," Sophia said softly, reading his mind. "It's a tool. A hammer doesn't replace the carpenter. It just helps him build." For a week, the box sat untouched in the corner of his living room. A silent challenge. The tremor in his hands grew worse. A constant, infuriating reminder of his uselessness. He'd wake up in the cold hours of the night and see the outline of the box in the dark. "A tool," Sophia's voice echoed. "Just a tool." Finally, one afternoon, driven by a despair that had nowhere else to go, he opened the box. He strapped the device onto his right arm. It felt strange, cool, and alien. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his lungs, and pressed the power button. A soft hum filled the room. He held his hand out in front of him. It was still. He held a pen. The tremor was gone, absorbed by the machine. He wrote his name on a piece of dusty paper. Elias Vasquez. The letters were his. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for months. The next step was harder. It meant going back to the source of his shame. He drove to his workshop. The key felt unfamiliar in his lock. The door swung open, and the familiar smells washed over him. But this time, they didn't feel like home. They felt like a museum of a life he no longer lived. He walked to his workbench. His favorite helmet was there, a layer of dust on the visor. His torches were neatly hung on the wall. He selected a small one, its weight comfortable in his hand, even through the device. He gathered a few scraps of steel and placed them on the bench. He lowered his helmet, and the world narrowed to the deep green of the filtered glass. He positioned the metal, his movements clumsy with rust. He struck the arc. The familiar blue-white light flared, and he heard the satisfying hiss. He guided the torch, the puddle of molten metal forming under his steady, device-aided hand. For the first time in nearly a year, Elias Vasquez laid a perfect bead. He didn't make a staircase. He didn't make a gate. He just welded two pieces of scrap together. When he lifted his helmet, his eyes were wet. He had done it. It wasn't the same as before. The device was a constant, humming reminder of his condition, but it was a bridge back to himself. He started small, a new hinge for Sophia's garden gate, a repair on a neighbor's bicycle. He worked slowly, carefully, his confidence returning with each steady seam. The device became an extension of him, less alien with every passing day. People in the neighborhood began to notice. The sign on his door changed. Closed until further notice came down. A new, smaller sign went up. Vasquez Metalworks, by appointment. The true test came a few months later. He received a letter from the city's library board. They had heard about his situation and his return to work. The custom staircase for the new library, the one he had failed to complete, had been finished by another firm. But now they had a new problem. A century-old ornate bronze railing, part of the original building's heritage, had been damaged during construction. It was a masterpiece of old-world craftsmanship, delicate and complex. No one in the city felt confident enough to repair it. They were asking Elias if he would at least come and look. He went. He stood before the railing, his gloved hand resting on the cold, damaged bronze. It was a sinuous floral design, each leaf and vine a testament to an artist's skill. The break was a clean, ugly gash through the center of a flowering bloom. The intricacy of the work was daunting. The tremor in his unassisted hand pulsed against the metal, a stark contrast to the work required. The project manager, a young woman named Anya, looked at him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Can you do it, Mr. Vasquez?" she asked. He thought of the tremor, the despair, the silent box in his living room. He thought of the first perfect bead he'd laid on that scrap metal. He thought of Sophia and her unwavering belief. He looked at the railing, not as an impossible task, but as a series of small, manageable welds, a collection of moments where he would need to be precise, to be calm, to be the craftsman he had always been. "I can try," he said. The work took 2 weeks. Each day he would arrive at the library as the sun streamed through the tall windows. He'd strap on the device, its hum of familiar comfort now. He'd work for hours, his world reduced to the bronze and the blue arc of his torch. He wasn't just repairing metal, he was repairing himself. With every steady, controlled movement, He was rewelding the broken pieces of his own identity. On the final day, Anya and a small crowd of library staff gathered to watch. He made the last, delicate pass, seamlessly blending the new metal into the old. He lifted his helmet. The railing was whole. The bronze flower bloomed again, unmarred. A spontaneous round of applause broke out. Anya shook his hand, her eyes wide with admiration. But the truest moment came later that evening. Sophia found him in his workshop, the device on the bench powered down. He was just sitting there, looking at his hands resting in his lap. They trembled slightly, as they always would. She sat beside him and took his hands in hers, feeling the fine vibration. "I'm so proud of you, Papa," she whispered. He looked at her, then down at their joined hands. His hands, the hands that had built and destroyed and rebuilt his life, they were not the hands they used to be. They were older, weaker, marked by a battle he never asked to fight, but they were no longer the hands of a broken man. They were the hands of a survivor. "You were right, Mija," he said, his voice thick with a quiet, hard-won peace. "It's just a tool. The work is still mine." He hadn't conquered the tremor. He had learned to dance with it. He had discovered that perseverance wasn't about stubbornly refusing to change. It was about finding a new way forward when the old path was gone. It was about accepting the tremor in your hands and deciding, with a quiet, stubborn roar, to weld anyway. The moral of the story: perseverance is not the absence of weakness or the refusal to change. It is the courage to adapt, the humility to accept help, and the quiet determination to find a new way forward when the old path is blocked. True strength lies not in hands that never tremble, but in a spirit that refuses to let go of its purpose, even when everything familiar has been stripped away.